Friends, why don't we begin if everybody's ready? And those who are scheduled to be panelists who I can locate on the attendee list and can successfully bring in as a panelist, I will do that. But for the time being, let's get started. Welcome to this meeting of the Melrose School Committee. The date is May 5, 2020. The time is just after 7 p.m. The first order of business this evening is the school committee spotlight, which tonight shines on the Franklin School. And I'm not seeing Miss Rosso on our panelist list, or am I missing her? Is Miss Rosso with us?
Mr. O'Connell, I'm not seeing, quite frankly, on my list, I'm not I'm seeing a quorum. Yeah, okay. I see 20 participants. It lists 12 panelists, but I'm only seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 listed. So I don't know if there are more technical difficulties.
Okay. Well, I don't see Ms. Rosso on my, again, if I could just speak for 1 second. I don't see Ms. Rosso on my list of attendees.
She was planning on attending. She emailed me at 6 o'clock on another matter and referenced her appearance tonight.
Ed, you're breaking up a little bit. If you can hear me, you might need to move closer to your wireless router.
Thank you, Neil. Okay. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we, in the absence of Ms. Rosso, why don't we come back to comments? I will come back to the Franklin School. And is everyone hearing me okay?
What is static?
All right, for the moment, let's move to, and again, I would ask if you're not speaking, if you could mute your microphone, that would be terrific. And for the moment, let's try to move to the public comment portion of our meeting. This is the portion of the meeting when members of the public are afforded the opportunity to address the committee on matters that are before the committee this evening's agenda or are otherwise within the jurisdiction of the committee. Are there any members of the public are generally afforded 5 minutes each to address the committee? Are there any members of the public who wish to address the committee this evening? If you could indicate as much by waving a digital hand or otherwise indicating as much in the chat section. Mr. Melrose, welcome. Mr. Melrose? Sorry about that, Mr. Melrose. Welcome.
Okay, are you able to hear me now?
We are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do want to point out that the open meeting law still has to be respected. With remote participation, you have to do a roll call vote even to know who's in the meeting. If you did have an executive session at 6:30, you would have had to have opened the meeting in public before you went into your executive session. You know, the public can only hope that you're obeying the open meeting law in all the times that you aren't in an open public meeting, based on how well you respect the open meeting law when you are in a public. Having said that, I followed along in the city council meetings this past week with the special ed stabilization fund money of $450,000 that the superintendent was asking the city council to approve to release to the schools. There are a number of issues that came up in my mind that I'd like to try to address here, and some of them are directly related to this year's budget. In this year's budget, we budgeted originally $1.475 million. We added a few thousands later for $1.488 million. The total amount expended this year between expended and encumbered right now is $2,343,659. However, in the current FY21 budget version, whatever, you have $1,520,000 listed there. Based on just this year's expenses, that shows about $823,000 deficit in the budget for next year based on what we spent this year. I haven't heard any accounting of how we expect the numbers to be less next year, given that we have these two large residential placements and we had such an increase in the number of students who are out of district this year. A couple other things that came up in the old days, and I don't know if you've changed any policies now, but the funds applied from the revolving accounts, the offsets, you always used to say that you were going to use the end of the year balance from a prior year to fund for the next year. I'd like someone to confirm today that that's what you're still doing. In next year's budget document, it shows that you're looking to apply $575,000 from the circuit breaker revolving account to next year's budget. What I find curious about that is I think I heard reported yesterday that there were only $6 left in the circuit breaker revolving account this year. The superintendent, when she was asked the other day, I heard her say that she thought that money was deposited into that quarterly. And I'm just trying to understand how, if we only use prior year funds to apply to a future year budget, and there's only $6 remaining and money is only applied quarterly, the math doesn't work. I am concerned that for money that we fully anticipated to spend this year for special education, that we've now gutted the special ed stabilization account. We knew we had these two residential placements this year. Back at the beginning of the year, we knew, all the money that's being spent in special ed was encumbered back in October of this year, October to November timeframe. You spent all your legal fees back in August of last year for the whole year. What I'm afraid of what's happening right now, you're creating what the override was supposed to resolve was you are now creating a structural deficit. If we don't fund special education appropriately and we got the reserve fund and we get the special ed stabilization account, basically the schools next year are going to have to ask for a free cash allocation to fund the schools. Again, doing that model is what some people call the structural deficit. And what it basically means is that you're budgeting more than you can spend, or that more than you're asking to take. It doesn't make sense to, the city ought to say, the schools ought to say, this is how much money we need, this is how much money we want the schools to perform these functions. And it should go to the city council. The city council can make the determination about the relative amount of money between the rest of the city and the schools, to assume that later on, like was done this year, that we're going to grab another $450,000 from a prior year. That's basically what happens. We took the $450, put it into the stabilization. Now, because we've overspent this year, we're taking that money out that was supposed to be for a rainy day. This wasn't a rainy day circumstance.
Mr. Melrose, that's 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who wish to address the committee? If you could indicate as much by waving a hand or stating so in the chat section. Seeing none, and with objection, the public comment period is now closed. That brings us to the announcements of the Superintendent of Schools. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Little tip, people, and I know it's difficult. One of the things we have found in many of our chats, virtual chats, is sometimes if you shut off your video, it helps the audio as well. I know that's difficult in a public meeting, but that is one of the things we've discovered in our weekly meetings with the commissioner. I believe you have in your packet a memo from Mr. Merrill regarding the election of student reps for next year. Does everybody have that? So again, it's the typical process. They will hold an election in the fall for next year's student reps. Are there any questions on that matter? No? All right. Yesterday, we rolled out phase 3. We sent it to all the parents. Again, as I've indicated in my letter, the main thrust of the commissioner on phase 3 is the addition of power standards and really an emphasis on connecting with those kids who we find are not engaged. So that is a real issue that I met with the team today. We have put in a number of systems with principals and teachers to monitor on a weekly basis who we are not hearing from or not responding. And we have a tiered response so that we can connect with those families and try to find out what's happening and help them solve the obstacles to engagement. Neil gave out computers yesterday. I think, and he can, I think if my memory serves me correctly, about 123 signed up. We thought it was 130, but after duplications, it was 123. Only 94 showed up. We're trying to address the ones that did not show up this week. Principals, as I've told you before, they have worked with teachers to identify families they are particularly concerned about. And we are reaching out to those families to the point that principals are picking up devices and delivering them if necessary. So now that phase 3 is underway, the principals and the other administrators and I have begun to talk about closing out school and what we will do about people's belongings. As you know, we are still in shelter in place until at least May 18th, or as Governor Bacon likes to tell us, that's not a magic date. All that means is the day he's getting his report. But we will begin to work with teachers because teachers as essential employees can come in under safe conditions. Then after the governor lifts the shelter in place and allows for more public movement, we will roll out a way for students to come in a safe manner to gather their belongings. And once they gather their belongings, the teachers will come back in to close out the buildings. So all those plans are in the works. But as you know, much of what we need to do is wait on guidance from the state.
Very good. Thank you, Superintendent. Any comments or questions for the superintendent at this time? Seeing none, we move on. Next up on our agenda is the consent agenda, which this evening consists of the following items: the school committee special meeting minutes for our public hearing on April 28th, 2020, the school committee regular meeting minutes for April 28th, 2020, the personnel report, and the monthly budget summary. Are there any items which any member of the committee wishes to remove from the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda made by Ms. Driscoll, seconded by Mr. Snellen? Ms. Hogan, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Rossi Thomas,
She seems to be absent for the moment, Ms. Hogan.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Mr. Selm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell.
Yes. And that motion to approve the consent agenda passes with 6 in favor and 1. And we forge ahead. Next up, the work of our subcommittees. And first up in that regard is educational programs and personnel with Ms. Selm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First up in educational programs and personnel is the elementary school handbook. There is a vote required for this. Point A shows the change memo. It looks to be pretty minor. Madam Superintendent, would you like to lead in this regard?
Yes, again, similar to the secondary handbook that we did the last meeting, there are very few changes to the elementary handbooks and cleaning up of language and the addition of some legal language that was required as a result of our mid-cycle review. Most of it stays the same. I would say 99% of it stays the same.
Thank you very much. As I indicated, there was a vote required. Are there any comments or questions prior to engendering a motion? Seeing none, at this time, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the changes to the elementary school handbook.
Motion made by Ms. McAndrews, seconded by Ms. Driscoll. Ms. Hogan, would you call a roll call vote, please?
Mr. O'Connell? Mr. O'Connell?
Scrambling to find the mute key.
Yes, yes.
Ms. McAndrew?
Yes.
Ms. Rousey Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Obremski?
Yes.
Mr. Selm?
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll?
Yes.
Broder?
Yes. Excellent. Motion passes unanimously.
Is there a second on that motion?
There was a second by Ms. Driscoll. Motion was made by Ms. McAndrews, seconded by Ms. Driscoll. And by my count, motion passes unanimously. And that concludes EP&P tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Selm. And that brings us to finance and facilities with Ms. McAndrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you to all the administrators who are with us tonight for your time and for all you're doing for our students right now. We have 6 agenda items on F&F tonight. Busy night. Our first agenda item is relates to meal prices for student breakfast and lunch for the 2021 school year. There's a memo in the packet and a recommendation to not increase prices for students at all for next year, and to increase the price for adult meals very slightly. And before I turn this over to the superintendent for any comments, I just want to, if I could, take a moment to commend Ken Dolce and the entire food services team for their management of the school lunch program in Melrose. It is managed very well, both from a nutrition standpoint, but also financially. And as a result, we will not, we're recommending not increasing prices for next year. And also, they are going to tremendous lengths right now to keep students who need free lunches fed through giving out lunches at the Lincoln School and the middle school, and I believe giving out breakfast as well. So I just wanted to thank them for that. And Superintendent Tamor, do you have any comments on this?
No, I just want to share with you the most recent update on the lunch breakfast program. The numbers are averaging 130 a day and growing daily. We provide a breakfast with the lunch. You know, the people pick up the lunch and there's breakfast for the next morning. And we provide Saturday and Sunday when they pick up on Friday. We are also continuing to deliver to those families who cannot come to us. So it has been very successful. The cafeteria workers, Ken Dulce, Chartwells have been fantastic about this. The drivers, our transportation drivers do the deliveries. They've also have helped us out by delivering Chromebooks, paper packets where needed. So really, everybody is working hard to help families. So I'm very thankful for this. We're very lucky that we are not raising prices. We're also very lucky, I would have to check the record, but this may be the third year that we've been in the black, which is unusual for school lunch programs. And so I think that is kudos to Mr. Dolce as well for how well he runs the program. So I'm fully in support of his recommendation tonight.
Thank you. There is a vote required for the purposes of discussion. Is there a motion to approve the school lunch prices? Made by
So moved.
Mr. Obremski, seconded by Ms. DeSelm. Are there any questions or comments on this motion at this time? Ms. Rezzy Thomas, I can't see you, but do you have a question?
No.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no questions or comments, Ms. Hogan, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. O'Connell,
Yes.
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Rozzy Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Ms. DeSelm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, and that motion carries unanimously with our thanks to Ken and the food services team. Our next item is the 3-year technology plan. I see we're joined by Mr. Ellis as well as Ms. Acevedo and others. Superintendent Tamor, would you like to introduce this topic?
Thank you, Ms. McAndrew. As you all know, in December or January, when I last updated our 5-year tech plan, I basically technology changes very rapidly. Some of the original goals turned out to be irrelevant as time moved on, and we actually exceeded the 5-year plan in the goals and expectations. As a result, Dr. Adams and Mr. Ellis, Ms. Acevedo, I believe Ms. Cristiano, Ms. Jones, Ms. Arnold, I hope I'm not leaving anybody out there listed there, put together another tech committee and have written us a 3-year plan. I asked for a 3-year plan, not a 5-year plan. The reason being, I think technology is changing so rapidly that you really can't think 5 years out. And the one thing I will say about remote learning and everything that we are experiencing and everything that I'm hearing from my colleagues and reading from all the experts online is that what we're going through right now will change the use of instructional technology even faster. We just have to figure it out. So with that, I would ask Dr. Adams, Mr. Ellis, and Ms. Acevedo to present with you what the 3-year plan is for Melrose going forward.
So I'd like to also thank 2 other members of the tech committee, Blair Cochran, who was a physics teacher at the high school, and Megan Lewis, who also is a 5th grade teacher at the Winthrop, who also worked on the tech committee to help us develop this plan over the last couple of months. And also thank Ms. Acevedo, who is the chair of the committee and helped shepherd us through the task assigned to us. The plan outlines 4 goals. We're going to speak briefly towards each of the goals. The first one speaks to personalized learning. The second one speaks to infrastructure and the hardware. The third one around professional development, and the 4th around curriculum. You won't find the word remote learning in the document, but we know that moving forward, the goals will have to be thought of in a setting where we know we may have additional periods of remote learning, as well as hopefully students in classrooms. So the goals will have to be implemented and developed with both settings in mind, as well as we prepare teachers for both types of situations of classroom environments and learning environments. So I'm going to pass it on to Melanie, who's going to speak towards the first goal.
The first goal focuses on expanding our current work in personalized learning and the digital literacy skills, supports, and resources that are needed to accomplish those objectives. So goal 1 states MPS will build and expand upon personalized learning environments that promote deeper, authentic learning experiences, featuring collaboration, creation, problem solving, and student voice. In year 1, we plan to increase the use of these practices, such as developing learner profiles and personalized learning plans, with a strategic focus in particular grade spans and content areas. Additionally, we plan to implement a second and third year of the personalized learning cohort. This group, along with others, will curate resources and examples to share with the larger community. This plan aligns with portions of the strategy overview already, and we plan to work with principals to incorporate objectives into the school improvement plans. Years 2 and 3 build on existing structures and include focus on additional grade levels and content areas. By the end of year 3, we anticipate more student ownership in the creation of their personalized learning plans, digital portfolios, and using student-led conferences as a means of sharing their learning and growth. Using these technology tools and personalized learning practices identified in our plan will advance the district's goal of learner-driven teaching and learning. And now Mr. Ellis will discuss the second goal of our plan.
So the second goal of the plan involves the infrastructure, as Ms. Adams mentioned. So we put together basically a rundown of all the hardware that needs to be replaced in the district within the next 3 years. Financially, trying to get this amount of money over the next 3 years would be difficult. It might go out into 5 years, but I'll tell you right now, we need the stuff that's in that list for hardware in sooner than the 3 years that we have on this list, especially the projectors and printers. We're in a really tough place with those two things. We've put a lot of this stuff into the CIP budget for this year, and where we didn't get all of it, we're hoping to get more next year, but that's a basic overview of it. Some of the security stuff at the middle school will be taken care of this summer. Hopefully we'll get some of these things done fairly soon. We can get the funds.
So Mr. Ellis's comments, I think you'll see in the plan that our teachers' knowledge of technology and use of technology is the amount of technology and the equipment working correctly when we need it to is outweighing teachers' knowledge. Our teachers are growing and trying to use the technology in their classrooms, but the access isn't always there, and or the devices are older and need to be replaced, or they can't make use of the smart boards that are also aging. And it relates to our third goal, which was around professional learning. The professional learning is two parts. One is to support the efforts around personalized learning. We want to continue the very successful personalized learning cohorts that Ms. Acevedo and Mr. Cristiano have helped us lead, and expand that to more teachers so that we can have more innovators. And that group has created some wonderful examples of personalized learning within remote learning settings, too, that are going to be models for us. The second is using, and we've become very comfortable, and are becoming very comfortable very quickly with how to use digital platforms to deliver professional learning. Ms. Acevedo is leading a group of about 20 of us in sessions, weekly sessions, about what do we need, what are some tools that will help us develop professional learning in blended formats, not just using Google Classroom asynchronously, but also synchronous teaching and professional development, and helping to model for teachers what that might look like and what are the tools that will help support that. So it has two goals around creating more personalized learning in our own teaching, and also providing professional development that allows for blended learning, more use of creating video libraries so that teachers have more access to what that looks like. And we'll continue to do it with two learning environments in mind. One, when we have students physically in front of us, and two, when we're working in a remote setting. I'm going to now talk about goal 4.
So our fourth and final goal states that MPS will have a sequence set of courses and curriculum that meets the Massachusetts digital literacy and computer science frameworks. At the elementary level, the team will continue to design and revise the scope and sequence for a cohesive K-5 curriculum for digital literacy and library media literacy in grades 3 to 5. At the secondary level, over the course of the 3 years, we're going to map out the current frameworks, identify holes, and have educators start rethinking courses to be sure that all standards are covered in grades 6 through 8 and 9 through 12. This plan also addresses a need to look for cross-curricular opportunities in all grades K through 12, implementing the digital literacy skills and computational thinking. A resource bank will be developed in order to support teachers with implementing technology into their practice. Additionally, as part of the curriculum development, universal design for learning principles will be used in order to support students with diverse learning needs. And a final objective will be to use school-wide PBIS language in each elementary school, the middle school, and high school to establish and implement technology expectations. These objectives will ensure that the district has a clear, cohesive, and consistent plan to build students' knowledge and skills as they progress through the grades. We want to thank you for allowing us to present a brief synopsis of our plan, and we welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms.
Echo.
Acevedo. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Adams.
I just want to say that the digital literacy team, and Ms. Jones, I know, is an attendee tonight, as well as Ms. Acevedo, Mr. Rowley, and Ms. Linsky, and Mr. Cristiano, have been outstanding. They are holding help desk sessions every day for staff. Our professional development to help teachers identify additional tools that they can use during remote learning. They have put hour after hour into not only in their own curriculum, but also supporting teachers. And they have been outstanding teacher leaders during this time. So we are super grateful to all of them.
Thank you, and thank you all for your work supporting students and educators, and for your presentation. For members of the public who might be watching, I would commend you to the technology plan in the packet. It's very detailed. Each of these goals is outlined with action steps and responsible parties and details of different grade level measures that will be taken and the infrastructure needed to support the plan. So. Moving to the committee, for purposes of discussion, is there a motion to approve the 3-year technology plan? Made by Ms. DeSalm, seconded by Ms. Driscoll. Are there any questions for the panelists? Ms. DeSalm.
Not a question so much as a comment. I really want to congratulate you and your team for putting together this technology plan. What is really key that I see here that I really appreciate is the detail and nitty-gritty that you've put in. At each junction, you talk about the budget implications as well as the technology that's needed, and that is really, really appreciated and above and beyond what we've seen in the past. So thank you so much, and please, Ms. Acevedo, Dr. Adams, Mr. Ellis, please thank you and thank everyone who's been involved in this process.
Very good. Ms. Driscoll.
Thank you. I would certainly echo Ms. DeSalm's comments with thanks and appreciation. I think what this plan memorializes is the district's devotion, everyone who has contributed to this, where we talk a lot right now, especially about leadership, and we talk about vision. I see so much leadership and vision in this plan. And I saw it at the very beginning, but I think about, where we came from with the school cancellation project, also known as blizzard bags, which engendered mixed feelings in many ways, but it truly set us on a path to where we are today. Not that you would ever probably have envisioned what today's world would look like, but I think it's a tribute to what you folks saw as coming at some point in some way. And so I consider this plan to be part of a visionary approach to education. And in true, as Ms. Acevedo commented and Dr. Adams commented, in alignment with the strategic overview. So the through line and the connection to our mission and vision and what we want to see as outcomes for our students with respect to academic rigor for all students is clearly shown in this plan. And it's just one more way that the district as a whole shows its leadership and excellence. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee? Ms. Razzie Thomas and Mr. Obrowski, I can't see you.
I've got a couple of questions and comments. This is Ms. Razzie Thomas. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you for your dedicated service through this emergency. I know our frontline workers are getting a lot of kudos and thanks and gratitude, but you guys are also a different type of frontline essential workers in a totally different way in terms of what is happening in education right now. So I feel greatly indebted to you for what you're trying to teach people like me. And also I really do want to thank you for your vision and being ahead of your 5-year plan. So at least we were positioned as well as we could be for an unseen emergency, this remote learning emergency that we're in. So thank you. And I know we're going to continue to need you through the next bunch of years as well. So buckle up. The other piece of this that's pretty complicated, obviously, is the budget scenarios that we're all so uncertain about and the capital improvement plan. I have no doubt that what you put in here in terms of the numbers are really accurate, and probably in true Melrose fashion, you're trying to do a lot with very little. And now we're going to have to do that even more. I'm just curious about some strategic thinking that you're probably engaged in now about how you're going to get this money. I don't know. Obviously, I don't know as much as I would like about the city and the state and federal budgets, but I'm just curious if there's any way we can go after grants, millionaires, billionaires, foundations for any of the first-time technology purchases or upgrades.
So let me speak to that, if you please, Ms. McAndrew. So a couple of things here. Absolutely, the financial future is a little scary, very unknown. And I thank you for recognizing that Melrose Public Schools educators always make do with whatever they have, and they stretch it a long way. There's a couple of things in the works. Unfortunately, Mr. Della Russo informed department heads the other day that Moody's has downgraded our bond rating, I'm sure, for the state. I'm sure that is true for 50 states. And that impacts our borrowing power, and that those are things that need to be worked out at the state and the city level. What we're doing in the meanwhile is going to pursue a couple of things, one of which my intent was to bring forward to you in a few weeks. Dr. Adams and I actually just discussed it. Could have been yesterday, could have been today. I don't remember my days anymore. We really, we had begun the pilot last year with the one-to-one with grades 6 and 9 with a 3-year plan. We really need to, while we can't underwrite it, we need to encourage families, if they are able, when they are able, to make sure their children have their own devices. That is key to a lot of this. Ironically, in the middle of all this, the state did a survey of all the cities and towns and asked the superintendents, how many of your kids have their own device? So while we have 4,000 children, and I will venture to say 95% of our households have a device, I doubt all 4,000 of our children have their own device. So Neil and I worked on this and we took a best guess and we said 60%. Lo and behold, I get contacted by the state and the gentleman who contacts me says, well, knowing Melrose, I think your number's low. I said, are you asking me per household or are you asking me one-to-one? He said, I'm asking one-to-one. I said, then my number's not low. There's a difference between what households have and what children have. And that is a major consideration in all this. And I think if what they're saying is going to be true and next fall or next winter, we will be in shelter in place again, that's something we can urge families to do. Neil has made an arrangement with one of our vendors so that the devices are low cost. But again, we certainly cannot afford to underwrite a lot of devices in this coming economy. But people can do a loan program. Today, across my desk came a grant application for school security. And I sent it on to Denise Gaffey and Elena Proakis Ellis because we have in front of the city council soon our school security request. While our school security request is for locking doors in all our buildings, if we could pay for school security with a grant, that frees up money elsewhere. So that is something we often are doing. We're moving around the money, trying to free up money. The last concern is we will certainly take funding from anybody who wants to set up a fund, either to help our families purchase their own devices. I had a wonderful parent reach out to me about maybe leading that effort, or corporations or whatever it must be. What we don't want, and I need to be clear about this, and I'm sure Neil will back me up, is cast-offs from companies. They usually are not the right mix for us. They don't match our needs. We can't make them secure enough. There's all sorts of things. That used to be a habit years ago when technology was just becoming common in schools. It doesn't work for us. So that is something we have to be careful about. One of the things that I really need to emphasize in this conversation, and Neil again referenced it, we need $1 million worth of smart boards. 8 buildings, possibly 9 buildings. Unfortunately, they are dying daily, and they are dying not 1 or 2, but in multiples. And it has to do with the way we originally purchased them, the way we originally installed them, planned obsolescence. The Capital Improvements Committee did not put that as a priority A. I asked Neil to then break it into a 3-year plan, which he did, which he has put in front of the Capital Improvements Committee. And I am hoping that that at least under the 3-year plan, we may be able to get it funded each year so that we can do a scaffolded replacement. But those are the things that we are thinking about as we go forward on the equipment piece.
Thank you. I think Mayor Broder has a comment on this question as well. Mayor Broder?
Perhaps a minor point. A lot of what the superintendent talked about tends to be paid for out of city side capital, and we are mindful of that. We are kind of guarding that a little bit more jealously than we otherwise might because of the uncertainty around the fiscal future. One thing that the superintendent did misspeak about, it's a minor thing, is that our bond rating has not been downgraded. It's a fairly technical point, but the outlook of all basically municipal and state debt has been downgraded to negative, which is a little bit of a different animal than what our debt position is rated as. We are still 1 tier below the best communities in the Commonwealth in terms of that piece. In a relative sense, we are still that strong. Obviously, the background financial picture is very up in the air. But as we sit here today, Melrose's bond rating has not been downgraded, which is pretty good news.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Rosie Thomas, did you have another question?
No.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of the committee have questions on this topic? Let me see. Okay, seeing none. There's a motion on to approve. Ms. Hogan, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. O'Connell,
Yes.
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Rousey Thomas. Ms. Rousey Thomas,
Yes, sorry.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Mr. Selm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries unanimously. The three-year technology plan is approved. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us for this part of the meeting to discuss the plan and for all your hard work on behalf of the Melrose Public Schools. Next on the agenda is a request for an authorization for a single signatory for our warrants in the current remote environment. Mr. O'Connell, would you please speak to this?
I'd be happy to, Ms. McAndrew. As the committee is aware, it is our practice to have members of the school committee sign each of the warrants once they are reviewed and approved by vote of the school committee. Upon consultation with our finance director, Ms. Secor, who is with us this evening, as well as consultation and input from the city's chief financial officer, Mr. Del Russo, and as well as advice from our legal counsel, Ms. Lindquist. I'd like to make a motion that for the pendency of the governor's emergency order, which has us meeting remotely and otherwise social distancing and staying at home as best we can, that for that period of time, we move our practice to having a single signatory on our warrants. There is authority in Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 56, for a single member to act in this regard, and there is otherwise companion statutory language that authorizes regional school committees to do this. So given our circumstances, it seems like this is a prudent and expeditious move. So again, my motion is that we move for a period of the governor's emergency order to a single signatory on warrants once those warrants are approved by the school.
Very good. There's a motion made by Mr. O'Connell. Mayor Broder, was that a second? Seconded by Mayor Broder. Are there any questions on this motion?
This is Jen Rousey Thomas. I have one question. Is it an assigned person, one person in particular? Is it a rotating designee so everyone gets a chance to sign those lovely warrants? Can we just get a little bit more specific, please?
Are you volunteering to do that, Ms. Rousey Thomas?
Whatever the chair wants me to do, pretty much.
I would amend my motion to have the chair be the single signatory for the time of the governor's order.
Very well. And Mayor Broder, I assume that you'll accept that change as a second. Ms. Rousey Thomas, any other questions?
Nope, thank you.
Great. Seeing none, Ms. Hogan, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. O'Connell,
Yes.
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Rousey Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Mr. Selm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll, Mayor Broder.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, and that motion carries unanimously. Moving on to 3 budget items this evening. The first is related to the current fiscal year 20, and so we'll take that first. This is related to anticipated refunds from education stations and other programs. Superintendent Tamor or Ms. Secor, do you want to speak to the memo that is in the packet on this topic, please?
Ms. McAndrew, it's informational only. Ms. Secor and I are working on the numbers weekly. We just wanted to give the committee a heads up because you will be seeing refunds in coming warrants, so that we wanted the committee to prepare. As you all know, by refunding this amount of money, it will impact our reserves and the offsets for next year.
Very good, thank you. So those refund payments will be presented at our next meeting on May 19th. And so families who are expecting or will see those refunds after that date. Is that right?
I will let Leah speak to that. I don't think it'll be that organized, quite honestly, but if Ms. Sakura wants to speak to it, please do.
Good evening. The current procedure, we have most of the information to the accounts payable person right now, and she is processing the majority of the refunds at this moment. So most families will see it within the week from the school committee meeting after the 19th, but there will be some stragglers afterwards because they're still compiling some of the information.
Very good. Thank you for all your work on that. Ms. Driscoll, did you have a comment or question?
The fact that this memo is in here rather than this, refunds going right to warrants, I do think it's the responsibility of the school committee to oversee refunds and to approve whether we will provide refunds or not. I appreciate the fact that the administration has proposed this, but I do believe that it's important for us as a committee to make an official decision on this. So I certainly am in agreement, but I would make a motion that we provide refunds as noted in the memo.
Very good. So there's a motion made by Ms. Driscoll to approve the refunds as noted in the memo for education stations, ECC, and spring user fees, which includes, I assume, athletic fees that were already paid. Mr. Obremski, is that a second? Seconded by
Yes.
Mr. Obremski. Any questions or comments on the motion? Mr. Selm.
Through the chair to the motioner, Ms. Driscoll, is it your intention that the amounts shown be what we are voting on and approving, or are you looking at this as we approve refunds in general, amounts to be determined and voted on at each warrant?
My intent is to show oversight, so I would certainly accept the amounts in the memo as strong estimates. And then I would believe that should someone want to sort of follow along, we could see the warrants that would tie generally to this, and that would exercise our oversight role in support of the community being deserving of those refunds.
Sure. Thank you very much. I completely agree in the oversight role. I was just looking for clarification around the language and the degree at which we hold these numbers to be accurate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, Ms. Hogan, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. O'Connell,
Yes.
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Razi Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Mr. Selm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and that motion carries unanimously. Moving on to fiscal 21 budget, two items related to the fiscal 21 budget tonight. First, the budget deliberations continue. For members of the public who are watching or who may watch in the future, in the packet there is an overview of the three different budget scenarios that we discussed and were presented at our last meeting. There's also a recommendation from the superintendent for approving version C of that budget, as well as a comparison between budget A, which was the original request made pre-COVID-19, and budget C, which is being recommended this evening. For the purposes of discussion, is there a motion related to the budget? Mr. Obremski. I think you're on mute.
I would move to accept budget C, while only filling the high needs positions by July 1st. And high needs positions are like a classroom position, grade 3 classroom position, grade 5 classroom position, things like that being high needs.
Thank you. So there's a motion to approve budget C with the caveat of only filling high needs positions between now and July 1, made by Mr. Obremski. Was that a second, Ms. DeSelm? Seconded by Ms. DeSelm. Ms. Taymor, do you want to speak to this, or we can go straight to questions and comments from the committee? I know we've gone over the basics of this last week, but maybe you could run through them again for us.
So no, again, we try to find a middle road here that would allow the district to continue the great work it's been doing and to keep valued staff. We try to meet the needs of our growing population and honor our contracts, which have class size recommendations as well as planning period and other recommendations. So that is not to say there is not issues in this that will be felt throughout the districts, throughout the district. So I'm hoping that we will not, as I said, we don't know what it's going to be, the budget is going to be. We won't know that until probably July. So if we don't fill positions that do not have to be filled immediately, that allows the district to wait and see, not lay off people at this time, and hopefully can make some strategic decisions if cuts in staffing are required. But those decisions would be made building off of the attrition. Right now, I'm looking at, let me just give a quick count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. About 17 people not returning for a variety of reasons, retirements, long-term subs that were hired only for the year that we rehire for. And of those so far, we filled, as Mr. Obremski spoke to, the grade 3 position we have to fill at Hoover, and we filled a SPEDS position and a school psychologist position and a science position. Those are often hard to fill, although we have more SPED and science coming, we think. So I think this is a prudent way to go. It gives us time to get numbers, and it gives us time to make better decisions once we have those numbers this summer. Again, the one thing I would urge the committee is if we have money, please, please hire 2 more social workers or mental health workers. As I shared with you last week, I don't think there is an educator in the state that is not concerned about how kids are going to come back to us. We're hoping they come back healthy, but we do know that this is a very frightening time for children and families, and we need as much help as we can get. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Taymor. Questions, comments from committee members? We also have several administrators here with us as well. And Ms. Rezzy Thomas, I can't see you. Did you have a question? No. Mayor Broder.
Real briefly, I want to recover the ground about the state of state aid and national aid. I think we've all heard it enough. We know it is very bleak, and we know this budget isn't what we hope to do. It's certainly not what I was hoping to do when I ran for office. And I know it's the same for everyone on this committee. You know, that having been said, I still think it is something of an impressive achievement to be able to grow the budget and add staff in the fiscal environment at the federal and state level that we're looking at. And may we have to roll it back a little bit? Possibly. Are we all hopeful that we will be able to add the invaluable tools that Mrs. Taymor was talking about? We all do, and we all recognize those as priorities, I think. So it's progress. It is not the progress that we want to make, but it is a step forward. And you know, it'll take longer than we wanted to get where we want to be. But I'm still optimistic that we're going to get there. And I appreciate the hard work and understanding of our residents, of our employees, and you all as we try to make sense out of this. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mayor Broder. There's a motion on the table to approve Budget C for fiscal year 21 in the amount of $36,976,124. Ms. Hogan, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. O'Connell,
Yes.
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Razi Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Mr. Selm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder.
Yes.
Thank you all, and that carries unanimously. I want to add my thanks to the superintendent, Ms. Secor, and also the city CFO, Patrick Delarusso, for their work on all of these budget scenarios and all of the behind the scenes work to respond so quickly in the face of this crisis. Moving to our next item, which is the budget categories. In addition to approving the overall budget number, the school committee also votes the major categories for the funds for each fiscal year. There's a memo in the packet outlining that the superintendent and Ms. Secor are recommending 2 budget categories for next year: payroll and non-payroll, so essentially people and everything else. I just wanted to make a few comments about that, if I might, before we take up this topic. At the beginning of this budget process back in January, we talked about, as a subcommittee, moving to a larger set of budget categories for fiscal year 21 and moving to, additional categories beyond the 2 that the school committee has been voting in recent years. Given the great uncertainty that we're facing right now and the need to maximize flexibility, and also just frankly, given that we don't know whether we will have to make additional changes to the budget between now and the start of the fiscal year, or even during the fiscal year, we are, the superintendent and Ms. Secor, recommending these 2 budget categories for now. I would just say that my commitment as one school committee member is to work throughout fiscal 21 to a place where we can have more than 2 budget categories. I think it would move us to a place of greater transparency. That is not to suggest that there's anything wrong whatsoever with doing the categories this way, but I think we can do that in partnership with Ms. Secor and with the superintendent incoming, Dr. Kuchenberger. But right now, I completely recognize that is not a helpful effort. And with that, is there a motion to approve the budget categories? Made by Mr. Obremski, seconded by Ms. Driscoll. Are there any questions or comments? Ms. Driscoll?
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Ms. McAndrew, first of all, for shepherding this process so very well, and for Mr. Obremski's steady hand behind you or with you in partnership. I appreciate all of that. I also completely agree with you. I would have suspected that we might be going to the categories as we discussed before and having a broader range, to your point exactly, which is to be able to share more with the community and have the opportunity to explain things in a different way. If we are in a different place, compromised to some extent by our some abilities to communicate and share within the capacity that we have as we go through this challenging transition at this time. So I certainly support these 2 categories, and I welcome the opportunity to hear more from you and Mr. Obremski about how you envision budget categories in the future. I think it provides an opportunity for the community to see, again, how we exercise our oversight. So thank you for walking us through a path that provides flexibility with an eye to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Seeing none, we have a motion on the table to approve the 2 budget categories as outlined in the memo from Ms. Secor. Ms. Hogan, will you call the roll?
Mr. O'Connell,
Yes.
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Razi Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Mr. Selm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll, Mayor Broder.
Yes.
Thank you all, and that motion carries unanimously. And with my thanks, and on behalf of Mr. Obremski as well, that concludes FNF for tonight.
Thank you, Ms. McAndrew. And as to policy and plan, Ms. Fiscal.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. I will invite the superintendent to please speak to the strategy overview, which is a document that leads the way for us all and is provided to us 3 times per year. Madam Superintendent?
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. So this year, you're getting a different document. You have this year's current strategy overview, which is the first page of the document in your packet. But one of the things that the team and I talked about is trying to provide the school committee with a longer view. Strategy overview, this format is a practice that is taught to new superintendents when they go through the new superintendent's induction program. It's become very common across the state. The Melrose strategy overview has been used as a teaching tool quite, on some matters because of our ability to talk about inclusive practices and equity. And so the team over many meetings beginning, I'd say, last November, we developed a 3-year strategy overview, recognizing that ultimately it's Dr. Kuchenberger's choices here, but we wanted the committee to see what we envision for the next 3 years with our growth in personalized learning, our emphasis on inclusive practices, and our growing practices in equity. So what is different here is typically I walk you through it. But with my departure, I thought it was more appropriate for members of the team to walk you through it. They are the people who are going to be here and helping to shepherd this plan through each year. So with that, I believe I have Dr. Tracy, Dr. Adams, Mr. Merrill, who are going to speak to this. So with your permission, Ms. Driscoll.
Certainly.
So I think I'll start and then I'll pass it off to Dr. Tracy and then Mr. Merrill. Dr. Tracy will speak towards sort of review at the elementary level, and Mr. Merrill speaking for the secondary team. As the superintendent stated, we spent multiple meetings looking at this and trying to draft it out, including in person and remotely. We asked for feedback from the coaches, elementary coaches, gave us some feedback, the curriculum directors, some teachers gave us feedback too on the document, and some various smaller teacher-based committees gave us some feedback on it. As the superintendent spoke, you'll see 4 themes that are sort of repeated through the document. One is trying to operationalize our goals and vision around personalized learning, which will include how we integrate technology, strengthening PBIS systems across all our schools, and an emphasis on social emotional learning, and how do we provide systems of support for students who need mental health and academic and tiered interventions. How do we make sure that our classrooms are equitable and inclusive, both for diverse learners and our students with special needs? We know you won't also see in this document the word remote learning ever mentioned, but we know that we're going to have to develop the strategic plan with 2 views in mind. One, when we have students physically in front of us. So what do these 4 broad themes look like when we have students physically in our buildings? And what does it look like when we have students and we're working remotely and learning in a remote learning environment? So these goals will have to be operationalized in with both kinds of settings in mind to the future. I'll pass it off to Mr. Tracy.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. I thought I could just go through and highlight some of the key areas in the strategy overview with a lens on the elementary grade spans, and then I'll turn it over to Principal Merrill, who I think will take a secondary view. As Dr. Adams mentioned, the work in this overview certainly remains critical, but we have to think about the possibilities around providing all of the aspects of this work remotely as needed and if needed. And so we certainly are keeping that in mind and on the forefront. I thought maybe the best way to do this was that I would begin what I believe is on page 114 of your packets, if you prefer to follow along visually. And I would just highlight a few key ideas as they pertain to elementary within each of the goals. So under goal 1 of curriculum planning and assessment, the main themes in here are that the process is student-centered, it's personalized, and it promotes this notion of self-directed learning through opportunities for students to have voice and choice. So how do we do this at the elementary level? And essentially, I want to make sure I call attention to Melanie Acevedo has really done some outstanding work around helping teachers develop this idea of personalized learning pathways. That idea of starting with pre-assessment work with students, having them do goal setting, teachers offering multiple means of representation, and then offering ways, multiple means of expression, and then following that with opportunities for student reflection on their goals and making sure that they're doing reflection about the pathways that they took to demonstrate their learning. So that idea of pre-assessment, goal setting, reflection, and then reflecting on their pathways. The teachers are spending a lot of time developing their capacity to design learning menus, playlists, varieties of assessment options, with an idea that we want a lot of the work to be inquiry and project-based learning. Teachers are honing ways that they give feedback on student growth towards proficiency. And at the elementary level, we're building towards student-led conferences with the idea that all of the elementary schools are on a continuum of learning around this practice. And we certainly have some teachers at some grade levels who are developing a proficiency at setting students up for success with student-led conferences. But the idea is that we'd like to take those practices and move them forward across the elementary level in the future. We are looking at the personalized learning cohort continuing on into the second and third years of this strategic plan. Really what we're doing is building teacher capacity and building teacher leadership, and then allowing those teachers to lead the work. We're doing assessment of our personalized learning practices by grade span. And we're really utilizing internal expertise that's being developed in the district so that we can just be observing and sharing practices amongst our Melrose educators. We're working with students to develop learner profiles and personalized learning plans. In grades 3 through 5, we'll be using digital portfolios and having portfolio showcases to allow students to highlight their learning, share their growth on a personal level. Throughout, we have the principles of UDL, the Universal Design for Learning, along with technology integration. The Roosevelt School and the Hoover School have been working with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education around an Inclusive Practices Academy. We're really excited about the work that they've been doing, and we're going to continue to learn from them moving forward. Throughout Goal 1, we refer to curating and sharing best practices with the idea that we want to highlight what's working well and replicate those practices across the elementary schools. Moving to page 123, where we begin Goal 2, the idea of teaching all students inclusive practices, including UDL, Universal Design for Learning, to ensure equity. The main themes here, we want to make sure we're identifying and responding to the unique individual needs of learners and responding in a personalized, but also a culturally responsive way. So that involves our multi-tiered systems of supports, make sure we're targeting interventions. We want to identify challenges with literacy and mathematics, intervene as early as possible, but also make sure that we're providing extensions for learners as needed. Really building our community circle practices, trying to take our PBIS practices, which are very strong at the building level, and expand that so we have a district-based PBIS team and approach. We're exploring an in-district special education program in the elementary schools within this plan. We use the habits of learning as a guide for the contributing factors that lead to students' academic growth. The learning progressions that you've heard a lot about and success criteria is helping us be clear about what we want students to know and be able to do, and how we give feedback on how well they did. And really being clear about what does high quality results, what do high quality results look like? Again, we use that personalized learning pathway, goal setting, choice, and reflection. Grades 3 through 5 will be doing exhibitions of inquiry projects, and we'll be using digital portfolios for those students to showcase their work. Moving on to page 133 for responsive and inclusive environment. The main themes here, it's really about building and sustaining those meaningful connections and relationships. I just wanted to mention throughout the remote learning experience, we've obviously been very attentive to maintaining and sustaining those connections. And in the remote learning guidance is even a line, it says, we believe the most important goal is for our students to be well, feel safe, maintain their relationships with teachers and peers. And in the strategy overview, we take that same focus on continuing to build our cultural proficiency and our positive behavior interventions and supports. I want to make sure I recognize the great work that Jess Patty has been doing across the elementary schools with PBIS, with social emotional learning, and helping us build our systems of supports, developing our community circle practices, restorative circles, collaborative problem solving, fair plans, check in, check out, check and connect, and all of our targeted skill lunch groups. There's some great work going on across all of the elementary schools that we want to deepen and continue. While the PBIS plans might be different at each of the different schools, there's definitely a district-wide focus that's being refined. And we recognize that everyone is on the continuum. We'll start from where we are with the idea that we want to move everyone forward and moving those PBIS systems to a school-wide and eventually district-wide implementation. We're really talking about making connections with families to our PBIS systems and structures while we're assessing our own cultural biases. And we're going to be doing some equity walkthroughs at each of the schools to examine those biases and our practices. So we're really focused on building our cultural proficiency perspective taking through elementary PBIS teams. We're looking at developing student support teams at each school to continue that work, and really doing specific outreach efforts to include METCO, ELL, special education, and other populations. Lastly, for goal 4 on 139 of your packet, we're really talking about open, culturally responsive modes of connection and communication, and just make sure that we're focusing on ongoing personal and professional growth. So collaborating with the diverse family communities, as noted before, model classrooms for personalized learning, high levels of collaboration in buildings and across buildings at the elementary level. And while we want unique school identities at each elementary school, we want to make sure that we're replicating the most effective teaching and learning practices district-wide. There were some very important practices to keep in mind that came out in the guidance for equity inclusion for remote learning. As we consider the diverse needs of our students, I see so many examples in our strategy overview that are captured in that document as well, that we'll be keeping in mind for the next 3 years. Being accessible, be flexible, be aware of cultural identity, be relational, and be transparent. And with that, I'll turn it over to Principal Merrill.
Hi, everyone. First, I just want to say I think it speaks volumes that the admin team continue, under the leadership of Superintendent Tamor, to continue to think about this document more of a long-term plan for 3 years, where we've taken kind of what started as a vision of a superintendent, which became a vision of a full admin team, and we'll use it as kind of a transition in leadership with a new superintendent transitioning in. So it's felt right as we've gone through the process, and I think it's kind of a great plan for how districts should transition. So that being said, there's certainly a lot of parallels between the technology plan that you heard earlier and what's in this plan. And there's a lot of parallel between this and some of the documents that were created through the remote learning process, certainly the equity document that Dr. Tracy just referenced. So I'll speak a little bit about some of the themes that kind of resonate with me as you look through the 4 goals. But so obviously, to no surprise, the personalized learning is something that certainly sticks out, and certainly in goals 1 and 2. And on the secondary campus, I think the work that the personalized learning cohort beginning to get some serious traction before we closed, the continued work with that to kind of create model classrooms and best practices, and having the experts share with each other what they're doing will pay dividends as we return back to school. Creation of common formative assessments by grade level and content area. The work in the social studies department, certainly at the secondary level. The creation of the Leaders in Civic Action course that will start this year. There's an A block course at the middle school. And then in years 2 and 3, the addition of the 10th and 11th grade course, American Studies in Modern Global History. And then I think one of the big pieces that younger students have started, and we've seen a little bit, certainly at the secondary level, and start to get into the high school, that will play a big role in our 9th grade year coming up, will be digital portfolios, and being able to have students showcase that work through a digital portfolio at the end of the year that kind of helps them frame a roadmap of the following 3 years of study for them. And I think you'll see the word exhibition in there, trying to give students increased amount of student agency, voice and choice, as Dr. Tracy mentioned, in how they showcase their learning to a greater audience, their peers, their teachers, other teachers in the building, and also their families. So I think that's an important piece. I think with some of that, with the personalized learning comes the technology. I think we've all, as was already mentioned tonight, seen the incredible importance of Chromebooks, if you will, for students. And you'll see mentioned in this document as well, continuing with the BYOD, and certainly the purchase program that was referenced that Mr. Ellis will be creating again for this summer. I think with the ability of possibly being remote again at times and preparing for that will be a big part of it. There's also the themes around equity and cultural proficiency that continue to be of great importance for us in thinking about equity in different lenses constantly as an admin team, and you'll see that in this document. Two of the things that kind of resonate with me is creating additional lines of two-way communication with different families and stakeholders, and a couple that have been on our minds a lot as we wrote this document and done some of our work this year, Medco families and also ELL families. Another addition that I think is important work that Dr. Adams took the lead on this year was the creation of a cultural bias tool. And you'll see that in the document. And that's a big part, K to 12, but certainly at the secondary level, where there's so many supplemental materials, and having a teacher be able to take a look at all of the materials that are used with that lens through cultural bias, and then being able to say, well, this might not be the best material to use, but sometimes it is the material we're going to use, and how can we balance that that piece on the other end of it. So we had great discussions of that, and we're happy to see that in this document. And then huge piece around UDL that comes through there in our planning, and certainly being able to teach and support all students. And that's going to support all learners and think about learner variability. And I think this year, certainly in remote learning, but also from being a different year where we were remote for much of it, the boundaries are going to be much wider when we return to school in any given class. The gaps will be larger, and teachers will have to be adaptable and be able to teach to a much larger variability of learner, and the boundaries will be much wider. And that will support certainly all of our staff, I think, at the secondary level, and certainly in particular our ninth grade staff as we move to unleveling. And those teachers have already been doing some of that work. And then lastly, the PBIS and SEL and systems of support, thinking about students on the social emotional level. And again, it all kind of comes to light in a different way for us as administrators and teachers and in community members as we're remote and we're not seeing students as much as we'd like, and we start to think about it more. But we want to continue to strengthen our PBIS system and how we promote positive behaviors and think about how we recognize those students, as well as create systems that help us manage the social emotional piece. And I'll have to say, Lindsay Dobbins has worked with other folks, but she certainly is the director of or administrator for student services and guidance, rather, taking a lead on that, and work closely with Dr. Adams as we try to create more systems to help us manage that work. So that's a little bit of what resonated with me anyway, as far as the secondary level. And I hope that helps, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Mr. Merrill, and thank you to the team. Really appreciate that, Dr. Adams, Dr. Tracy. Superintendent, did you have anything you wanted to close with before we go to questions or comments from the committee?
Yeah. The only thing that I want to say, and quite frankly, Ms. Driscoll, you're the only one who's been here for all of this at this point in time, is when I first brought this to Melrose 8 years ago, it was very new. The committee backed me on this. Every year you saw the plan evolve, so it was a year-by-year evolution. And I think as we move forward, not only did we get more sophisticated and more targeted in our goals and action steps, but I think it really, really reflects the depth of work the Melrose Public Schools educators have done with your support and the community support to create what we currently have. And it is my hope that Melrose can continue to do this growth and continue to make these changes on behalf of students, in spite of the difficult times we are facing. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I'm going to invite comments from the committee. First, I'm going to just ask whether Ms. Rosie Thomas, since I can't see her, has any questions or comments.
It pays to not be on a video to get the first dibs. No, I'm fine. Thank you very much for all your work, though.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Ms. McAndrew?
Thank you. Just real briefly, I just want to commend everyone for the work on this document. It's absolutely tremendous. I think it's a huge step forward that it's 3 years. And I also, someone mentioned earlier in our meeting the concept of through lines and themes running through things. And to me, I just think, but when we take these 2 3-year plans that we've talked about tonight, the tech plan and the strategy overview, we can see all of those themes running through, not just to technology, but also to curriculum and assessment and professional development. And I hope that members of the public and parents especially who sometimes say things to us as school committee members like, well, what's the plan for the schools and what do the schools plan about this or plan about that, that they'll take some time to read through this document, because it really provides in great specificity a really wonderful path forward on a number of different fronts. And so I just want to thank you for all of that work on top of everything else that you're doing right now. And I'm glad that we are seeing this now at this point in the school year, while we are still in the current school year and moving and looking forward to next year. So thank you all. Thank you, Superintendent Taymor, Mr. Tracy, Dr. Adams, and Mr. Merrill for being with us.
Mayor Broder.
Sorry for the delay. Everyone smile. It takes me a little bit of trouble to find the microphone. As someone who's the newest member of the committee, I suppose, a lot of what came up during the campaign, a lot of what came up during the superintendent search, and a lot of what comes up in day-to-day conversation with all the stakeholders in the community is this idea of equity and inclusion and continuing to build it, continuing to make it better, continuing to connect. And it strikes me that ultimately what we're talking about is student voice and making sure that kids have an opportunity, our students have an opportunity to be heard in not in an unchallenged place, but in a safe place and in a way where they know that they're going to be respected no matter what they bring to the table. And that is a credit to everyone, certainly, that has come before me and the work that they have done. And I think it's particularly reflected in what I've seen in terms of how Mr. Merrill and his team have been engaging the senior class this year. I mean, it's been a very, very difficult, really unprecedented situation. And to figure out how to give our students voice when they're not even sure how they fit in. Are they in, or are they out? Are they done, or are they not? Has really been remarkable, and no need to respond really. But particularly as the parent of a senior, I very much appreciate that work, and I think it is the culmination of the ongoing work that we've seen in the document that you presented today. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mayor Broder. Anyone else? Seeing none, just a closing comment. I think that Superintendent Taymor, your teachers were very well represented tonight by the leadership team who presented this evening. I know that you always appropriately give credit to everyone who has made a contribution to this work. And while it's been noted in the past, I think it bears noting again that, this is work that is truly teaching and learning, but that this district embraces all of its staff members, whether they're drivers, paraprofessionals, cafeteria staff, anyone who works in our buildings are really part of this equation. And all of them go into, when we think about equity and we think about improving our practice, all of them have a role in that. So I think that's a tribute to your entire staff and your entire team, and I hope that you bring that back to them with our thanks.
Thank you.
Given that, Mr. O'Connell, that concludes policy and planning for this evening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Driscoll. And we move ahead to the announcements of the chair. Item number one, as I mentioned last week, it's my inclination in terms of setting future agendas that we put our decision-making process around the BB school and the potential reuse of same on the for the near term, given our logistical circumstances and also our financial circumstances. I did indicate last week that I was going to put this item on the agenda again this week in case any further comments. So with that said, are there any other comments at this time from the committee in this regard? And Ms. Razzie Thomas, I can't see you. Want to chime in on this?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Do we have any liaison reports? Seeing none, I would just note that, as I'm sure the committee is full aware, tomorrow is National School Nurses Day. And so we thank our school nurses in advance, particularly during this extraordinary time. And we thank them for all their work. Superintendent,
Mr.
please.
O'Connell, two things. It's Teacher Appreciation Week. So let's not let that go by. And I just do want to give a shout out to our nurses. You may not be aware of it, but they've been helping in this closure. They've been checking on families, kids that we're concerned about, they reach out to. I had one nurse visited a family for us because we had a concern. So again, while they do not technically work for the school system, they work for the Board of Health. They are school-centered and student-centered, and for that, we thank them.
Thank you, Superintendent. And of course, every week is Teacher Appreciation Week in Melrose.
Thank you, it is.
And we move on. The last item on our agenda this evening is our need for an executive session. And just let me note right now, lest I forget, we will not be returning to public session once we adjourn to executive session, if that is the will of the committee. Let me further state for the record that our need for executive session this evening is for the following: to approve executive session minutes for April 7, 2020. Secondly, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining regarding a side letter of agreement with Teamsters Local Union 25, the administrators unit, when an open discussion might have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the school committee. And thirdly and lastly, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Melrose Education Association Unit A teachers, where an open discussion might have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. All of that said, is there a motion to adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Made by Ms. Razzie Thomas, seconded by Mr. Obremski. Ms. Hogan, would you be kind enough to call the roll?
Ms. McAndrew?
Yes.
Ms. Razzie Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Obremski?
Yes.
Mr. Selm?
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll?
Yes.
Mayor Broder?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell?
Yes. And that motion to adjourn to executive session passes unanimously, and we are so adjourned. Thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing you in executive session.